What's going on, guys? EDRONE here, and I'm getting ready to do a little bit of practice soldering. I soldered once when I was young, but it's been a long time, so I went ahead and bought this kit here on banggood.com, and I've obviously taken it out and checked everything, make sure everything was working. But it's a little soldering iron kit. It is a 60 watt. It says it's 60 watt anyway, and it says 220 volt, but that is for European plug. So when we convert 220 European to United States, you get 120 for the United States. So as long as you have an adapter, it'll plug in the wall just fine. I already plugged in and make sure it worked. So here's the soldering iron here. Nothing special, nothing fancy. It was rather cheap. I got the whole kit, I believe, for under $20. So that's a really good deal, I think, as long as everything works okay. But you can see there's the tip that comes with it there. There's the soldering iron. So in this kit, you also get some more tips here, different shapes and size tips there for different types of jobs. You get this cheap little metal rinkety-dink stand here that's yeah, I probably won't be using this at all, not unless that's all I have. So yeah, not too great. They give you a little bit of solder. I'm not really sure what kind of solder it is. It didn't really say, so I probably won't be using this just because I don't know what kind of solder it is. But we could probably maybe do some research and find out maybe. Alright, moving on. You get a little cleaning sponge here to clean the tip of your soldering iron there. And they also give you some nice little tweezers here, to help maneuver wires or what have you. So it's kind of neat there. Give you some little tweezers there. And they also give you the regular tweezers that just kind of open up. So that's pretty neat. They also give you this solder sucker here, and basically, you just push the plunger in until it clicks. Get right over your solder joint, heat it up, and boom, push the button, and it sucks the solder right out and spits it back out. So it's pretty neat. Comes in this nice little case, which I like. That way, I can keep everything nice and tidy in here and packed up when I'm not using it. It's got like some styrofoam here, as you can see. Not a bad little case, not a bad little kit for 15 bucks. I mean, it's pretty cheap. So like I said before, guys, I've never done soldering. Only a little bit when I was younger, and it's been a really long time since I soldered. So, before I go trying to solder this new project, I figured this would be a good time to get some practice in. And so we're going to practice doing some soldering. But first I want to talk about solder. So this is the solder that I went with, guys. And before this whole journey, I knew nothing about solder. I knew absolutely nothing. I didn't know what kind of solder to get, what size to get. I just had no idea. So I went and watched, Joshua Bardwell's video on solder, and he had a soldering expert on there or what have you, and he was very informative on basically, what kind of solder should we be using on these quadcopters. And for the longest time, people have been using 60-40 solder, which is found in your local hardware stores, and that seems to do the job. But if we can do the job better, why wouldn't we? So right here you got this solder from China, whatever. It's made in China, but it has everything that it's supposed to have in order to solder quadcopters. So you'll notice right here, It is 2% flux, so there is flux inside the solder, which is good. That will allow it to bond with the metal easier. It's 0.8 millimeters in diameter, so it's very, very thin. Now, this is a 6337 mixture, so it is a tin lead mixture of 6337. Now, like I said, the 6040, you know, is what people have been using for a long time, but evidently the 6337, according to the soldering expert that Joshua Bardwell talked to, is supposed to be a better solder. Supposed to be able a lot easier to work with and a lot better for quadcopters. So I went ahead and got this spool here at Banggood. It was like $1 something, $1 and some change, and it feels, you know, it feels pretty heavy. So hopefully there's a decent amount on there, but it should be enough for my needs. So we're gonna get ready to solder, practice solder, that is. I got my PDB here with my helping hands, and this PDB, like I said, I'm not going to be using this in the build. So what better way to get some practice than actually use a real PDB? So what we're going to do is we're going to take some wire here, and my soldering iron's heating up now. We are going to strip this wire. So we got our strippers here. All right, so here's our wire here. We're going to go ahead and strip this wire, and this is 16 gauge wire. So we're going to go ahead and strip that wire. Nice little strip there. You see that? See if we'll zoom in there. Trying to focus. Anyway, got a nice little strip there. Actually, it's probably a tad long, but this is just for practice. So we're going to basically solder this wire here to one of these pads on the actual PDB. So first thing we need to do is get our soldering iron, the tip. We need to get the tip tinned with the solder. So we're going to go ahead and put some solder on here. See if it's hot enough to actually melt it yet. Not quite, so it's still heating up. So let's go ahead and crank it up a little bit higher. I've got it set to 400 Celsius. Let's go ahead and crank it up to 450 and see if that'll work. So this does have, you know, a temperature setting on here. However, I'm not convinced that it's really temperature. It's more like watts. So when you turn it up, you know, you're going to get watts. There we go. We're starting to get a little bit of melt there. You see that? So we're just going to go ahead and get some solder on that tip. That way we don't oxidize our tip. There we go. Get some solder on there. And we're looking for just a nice smooth layer of solder on our tip. And you can see some of the flux coming on there. Alright, so let's just get a little bit of that there. Take our little sponge and just wipe off that little bit of solder there. A little bit of excess solder there. Okay, so now we have our tip tinned with the solder. Now let's go ahead and get our PDB pad heated up. So this is, like I said, guys, this is like the first time I've done this. So we're going to heat this pad up here. And this is a rather large pad. So we're trying to heat the pad up hot enough to get the solder to melt to the pad. and it's not quite working. So I don't know if my iron's just not hot enough. We'll let it get a little bit hotter and see, but this is why we practice, because we need to make sure that the tools we have for the job are going to be sufficient. So let's try this again. I'm going to heat this pad up. And these are very large pads as well. So as you can see, it's not heating the pad up enough to actually have the solder melt to the pad. And what we've got, that solder right there, is no good. See that? So it's melting the solder on the tip, but it's not actually melting on the pad. So this iron might not be good enough for what I need, because I need something that's going to get hot. You can see that or not. But these pads are very large, and even the smaller pads, you know, even the smaller pads, let's see if I can get you a little bit of an angle there. So this is a good thing that we're practicing now versus on the actual drone itself, on the actual board that I'm using, because if this gets tore up, it's no big deal. I'm not planning. It looks like my tip may have oxidized as well, so it's not transferring the heat. So let's clean this tip off again. I think that's what happened, guys. I think the tip actually oxidized. It didn't get hot enough. I've got it turned all the way up, as high as it'll go. I'm going to try it one more time with this pad right here. I'm holding heat to the pad. Trying to transfer the heat to the pad so that the pad itself will melt the solder, but it's just not hot enough, guys. It is not hot enough. Like the tip itself, see that? That's not good. That's not bonding. That's not a good solder joint. See, that's not bonding with the actual board. And now it's sticking. See that? It's actually sticking to the pad itself. So yeah, see that? That's not a good joint. So it's a good thing we know this now, because as you can see, the pad itself is not melting the solder. Only the tip of the iron is melting the solder. So, well, that's kind of a bummer. But like I said, it's good to find out now. Try this again. Maybe I have my tip tin good enough. I'm going to try to get the tip tinned a little bit better, because you have to have the tip of the soldering iron tinned. Let's try it again. I really don't think that this soldering iron is going to be hot enough to actually melt the solder. transfer the heat to the pad. See that? It's just sticking. That really stinks. It's just not hot enough. Yeah, so this is definitely not good, because if I can't transfer heat hot enough to these pads to melt solder, this isn't going to work for the build. See that? That solder should be melting right now to the pad from the transfer of heat, and it's not. Now, I shouldn't be having to hold this on here that long, and now my tip's oxidizing. You see that? At least we know now. At least we know that this soldering iron is turned all the way up. It's just not hot enough. I mean, look at that solder joint right there. That's horrible looking. I mean, that just looks terrible. I mean, it barely melts the solder itself, really. Try it again. Just keep practicing, you know. I mean, this is... like, I shouldn't have to hold that much heat to the board. Nope. Still not. Oh yeah, I mean, that pad's not even melting that solder at all. Look at that. I need something with way more heat. I mean, it's just like looking like gel almost. Yeah, that's not a good soldering joint. Well, back to the old drawing board, guys. So this soldering iron is just not, and I should have known. I mean, you know, it's a cheap Chinese, you know, $15 kit. I should have known, you know, it's just not good enough for this type of soldering. I need something with a lot of heat to be able to heat these pads up hot enough that when I put that solder on these pads, it's going to melt right to the pad. And it's just not doing it. So, well, while we're doing this video, let's go ahead and try our solder sucker here, see how it works. So we're going to push our plunger down. Got our plunger down. We're going to heat up the solder. Maybe. Look at that. I mean, it's not even... Wow. It's not even liquefying this. Look at that. I'm touching the solder and it's like almost like gel. Like, that's not a good joint. See that? It's just not getting hot enough to actually get it in the liquid form. I can't even get the solder sucker to work. See that? I mean, I gotta sit here and hold it on there that long. I'm gonna damage that board. Yep. So this is not good for soldering power distribution boards, flake controllers, anything that requires a lot of heat. I thought 60 watt would be enough, but obviously it's not for this particular iron. And now my tip's all dirty. But see, I'm glad that we went ahead and tried to practice on this board here before we did any real soldering, because I would have been mad if I put a solder job like this onto my actual PDB that I want to use. See, it just barely is melting it on the tip. I mean, that should be melting instantaneously. And it's getting hard before it's even sticking. So that's a good, and look at that, it won't even, it won't even heat it back up. Look at that. It's like paste almost. See that? So that's not going to work. That is not a good bond. It's almost like gel. So I'm not going to waste any more solder. We're going to try the solder sucker again. See if it'll take it back off. It did something. Got a little bit of it off. That's disappointing. That is really disappointing. I had high hopes for this little cheap iron. But it goes to show you guys, you can't cheap out on the soldering iron. You know, not when you're trying to do some really good soldering. You need to be able to transfer heat. So we're gonna have to look into getting a better soldering iron. I have one in mind. It's not too terribly expensive, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn this thing off because it's done. Clean this tip off. But I have a soldering iron in mind that we can definitely use and hopefully get some good joints with. Yeah, I mean, this just is not getting hot enough at the tip. Well, till my next video, we'll be kind of waiting out to get another soldering iron. So as for now, we're gonna keep on waiting, but hopefully we'll get a good soldering iron, be able to do some more practice before we start our build. Till then, thanks for watching, and please subscribe. EDRONE out.